9 Times Death Missed Lincoln, Episode 4, The Poison Train Plot. It wasn't a bullet, it wasn't a knife, it was something far quieter. A glass raised in toast, and almost. A final breath. Chapter 1. The Night Train. The platform was slick with rain. Philadelphia's station bustled with late-night traffic, porters shouting, horses clattering, the hiss of steam from waiting locomotives curling into the night like restless spirits. At 11:45 p.m., a black carriage rolled up to a discreet side entrance. Inside, Abraham Lincoln leaned forward, hands clasped between his knees. "Greater than, no announcements," he said quietly. "No crowd, no music." His aide nodded. "Greater than, it's all arranged." "Sir." Lincoln straightened his coat, adjusted the tall black hat now familiar to every citizen of the Union, and infamous among those who would undo it. "Greater than, let's get it over with," he muttered, half to himself. This was not an official trip. No public schedule, no planned address. Lincoln was moving under cover of darkness, returning to Washington after urgent consultations in Philadelphia. Consultations too sensitive for telegrams, too dangerous for daylight. Security, as always, was minimal. A few trusted aides, a single Pinkerton agent, no soldiers. Too many uniforms attracted too many eyes. The president preferred to move like smoke, unseen, unheard, unavoidable. He boarded quickly. The car assigned to him was the third from the engine. First class, but modest. No grand fittings, no gleaming brass, just polished wood, green upholstered seats, a small dining area to the rear. The train would depart at midnight, non-stop to Washington, 8 hours through darkened countryside. Also the manifest claimed. At MetaFacts Legends, we obtained a copy of that manifest. 32 names, 3 servants, 2 Pinkerton agents listed only by initials, and 1 space, inexplicably blank. The conductor later insisted it was a clerical error, but the timing of that blank tells another story. Because someone else boarded that night. Someone not listed, someone carrying a small, velvet-lined case tucked discreetly beneath a gray traveling cloak. The case contained no gun, no blade, just a vial, clear, harmless-looking, deadly. The rain intensified. Lincoln leaned back in his seat, gazing out the window. "Greater than, there's a strange comfort in fog," he said, smiling faintly. His aide, sitting opposite, frowned. "Greater than, not to me, sir. Fog hides too much." Lincoln tapped the glass with a gloved finger. "Greater than, all reveals who's willing to walk through it." The train jerked forward. A low whistle echoed against the iron and stone of the city. The journey began. Inside the dining car, preparations were underway. A small table was set for Lincoln. Simple fare, roast chicken, steamed potatoes, bread, wine. The wine was an afterthought. Lincoln rarely drank, but etiquette demanded it be offered. And etiquette can be a deadly weapon. The man with the velvet case moved through the crowd with ease. He was unremarkable. Average height, average build, face partially obscured by a drooping hat. He exchanged a few words with the steward, asked about seating, asked about the president, joked about the weather, and, at one point, slipped into the dining car's service area unnoticed. There, he found the bottle intended for the president's table. He worked quickly, poured a few drops from the vial into the wine decanter, wiped the neck clean, replaced the cork. It took less than a minute. No one saw him, or so he thought, because history, like trains, rarely runs exactly on time. At MetaFacts Legends, we traced testimony from a porter named Jeremiah Lane. Jeremiah was 17, new to the job, overzealous. He was sweeping near the service corridor when he caught a glimpse of a man hunched over the wine table. He thought nothing of it at first. Passengers often wondered, but something nagged at him. The man wasn't serving himself. He wasn't stealing. He was deliberate. Jeremiah decided to mention it to the steward. Casually, a whisper, an observation, enough to plant a seed of doubt. Minutes later, the steward approached the wine, paused, frowned, The cork looked wrong, looser than before. He sniffed the decanter. Nothing unusual. He dipped a spoon, tasted. Nothing strange. But the steward was cautious by nature. He replaced the decanter with another, identical in appearance, untouched, and moved the suspect one aside. At 12:48 a.m., Abraham Lincoln entered the dining car. Tired, stooped, hungry, he sat without ceremony. The steward approached, deferential, greater than, "Mr. President, may I offer you some wine?" Lincoln waved it off, greater than, "Perhaps later." He ate sparingly, spoke little. The few other diners kept their distance. Even at midnight, even on a secret train, Lincoln's presence was gravity, unavoidable. The man with the velvet case sat 2 tables away, watching, waiting. His hand occasionally touched the inside of his coat, where another vial waited. Plan B, Jeremiah Lane, still uneasy, watched him, took mental notes. Height, build, shoes, a scar on the left hand. Nothing dramatic, nothing you could point to and say, "Guilty," but everything you could feel. After the meal, Lincoln stood, tipped his hat to the steward. "Greater than, you set a fine table." "Sir." The steward bowed. Lincoln exited. The man in the gray cloak remained. For now, but his plan was unraveling. Because the poisoned wine, intended for Lincoln, was quietly poured down the drain minutes later. No incident, no alarm, no death, just a sigh into the dark. The train rumbled southward. The hours dragged. The man grew restless. And then, just past Baltimore, he vanished. Left the train at a maintenance stop. Slipped into the mist. No one pursued, because no one realized yet what had almost happened. By morning, Lincoln was back in Washington. Alive, whole, unaware, the hat on his head, the briefcase in his hand, the weight of survival pressing invisibly against his shoulders. The poisoned wine was discovered 2 days later. Tested, confirmed, strychnine, odorless, colorless, fatal within minutes. But by then, the man was gone. No name, no record, no justice, only a ghost on the night train. MetaFacts Legends followed the paper trail, pieced together the whispers, reconstructed the routes, and what we found is chilling. The man had purchased his ticket under the name William Kerr, a name tied to Confederate sympathizers operating out of Canada, a network specializing not in battles, but in sabotage and poisoning. Lincoln, unknowingly, had brushed against the edge of that network and survived, by inches, by chance, by a 17-year-old porter who trusted his instincts. At MetaFacts Legends, we don't believe history is inevitable. We believe it's accidental, fragile, balanced on the smallest decisions. A changed decanter, a nervous glance, a boy's hesitation. That's what saved a president. Not steel, not strategy, just human instinct. And maybe, just maybe, a little grace. Because history, like trains, runs on rails we can't always see. But sometimes, someone throws a switch, and we stay on track. For one more mile, for one more day, for one more chance to finish the story. End of Chapter 1. Chapter 2: The Seat Not Taken. History likes to pretend that everything happens for a reason. But sometimes, it doesn't. Sometimes, survival comes down to a chair, to a wrong reservation, to a late arrival, to a seat not taken. The midnight train to Washington was full, not overflowing, but busy enough that every reserved seat mattered. Abraham Lincoln's car was near the center. A special section had been arranged, not for security, but for privacy. The seats were more spaced, the lamps dimmer, the noise lower. Lincoln wasn't traveling alone. 3 aides, 2 Pinkerton agents, unnamed, unacknowledged, but present, and, unintentionally, a few civilians who had bought tickets for the same car, unaware of their company. At 11:55 p.m., a minor disruption occurred. One passenger, Samuel DeWitt, a merchant from New York, was delayed by rain. His carriage arrived late. By the time DeWitt boarded, his assigned seat had been accidentally given to another man. No one wanted to argue in the wet and the cold. The conductor apologized, shuffled his papers, and reassigned DeWitt to a different car. 2 cars back, further from the president, closer to the luggage hold. Samuel DeWitt didn't care. He had whiskey in his flask and the heavy coat to nap under. But that single reassignment shifted the entire layout of the car. It created a vacancy, a seat next to Lincoln, unoccupied, open, waiting. The man with the velvet case, the one who had already tempered with the wine, noticed. He adjusted his position, drifting slowly closer, 1 table away, 1 breath closer. At MetaFacts Legends, we reconstructed the seating charts based on survivor accounts, railroad records, and payroll manifests. There was indeed a discrepancy. 1 more body in that car than should have been, 1 less in the next. A small error, an inch, a heartbeat, and that heartbeat almost killed a president. The night wore on. The train slid southward, cutting through the mist like a black arrow. Lincoln dozed briefly, head against the window, dreamless, as far as anyone knew. Across the aisle, the man with the velvet case waited, patient, calm, because poison doesn't shout, it whispers. He had another plan. Plan B. The wine had failed, but there was a second option. A small vial, a cloth, dabbed across a handkerchief, brushed against a cup, an armrest, a door handle, enough to slip into the bloodstream. Enough to do the job quietly, enough to leave the world wondering if it had been illness or assassination. But he needed proximity, and the empty seat offered it. At 2:14 a.m., the conductor passed through to check tickets. Routine, mechanical. The man with the velvet case produced his stub, smiled, nodded. No alarms, no concern, just another traveler on a tired train. But then, a change. At 2:17 a.m., one of Lincoln's aides, William Crook, rose to stretch his legs. Tired, cramped, distracted, he moved instinctively toward the empty seat near Lincoln. Paused, then sat, unconscious decision. No calculation, just weariness. Crook settled in, tipped his head back, closed his eyes. The man with the velvet case hesitated, stiffened. The moment was lost. The seat was no longer empty. History had shifted again, because of tired legs, because of random fatigue, because of a man trying to shake the numbness from his spine. At MetaFacts Legends, we call these moments accidental anchors. Points in the timeline where fate could have drifted, could have sunk, but didn't. Crook never knew. Lincoln never knew. The man with the velvet case knew. And he adjusted, waited longer, watched the rhythms of the car, the flicker of lanterns, the drip of rain from the roof, the breathing of men too weary to sense danger. At 2:43 a.m., Lincoln stirred, spoke softly, greater than the wheels sound like sermons. He said, half smiling. Crook opened one eye. Greater than, beg pardon, sir. Lincoln chuckled. Greater than, long, repetitive, and bound for a destination no one quite understands. They both laughed, softly, wearily. The man with the velvet case listened, measured, calculated. Could he slip close enough? Brush a sleeve, tilt a vial? No, not tonight, not now. Too many eyes, too many bodies, too little opportunity. He leaned back, breathed through his nose, plotted alternatives. At 3:05 a.m., the train slowed. A water stop, brief, 5 minutes. Stretch legs, relieve boilers, refill canteens. The man stood. So did Crook. So did the steward. So did 2 Pinkerton men, rising together. Subtle, watchful. The man with the velvet case hesitated. Then, without a word, he turned, stepped off the train into the fog, and didn't come back. Gone. Vanished. The seat he might have taken remained empty the rest of the journey. A reminder, a scar, a narrow miss, invisible but real. MetaFacts Legends traced the incident through fragmentary logs. Found the steward's later testimony. Greater than, I thought he might have gone for fresh air. Never returned, no baggage left behind. Strange. Strange indeed. The man left nothing. No fingerprints. No ticket stub, no name, just an absence, a gap, a void, and sometimes that's enough. Lincoln arrived in Washington unscathed, unaware. The train pulled into the station just after 7 a.m. Rain still falling, the platform still slick. Another day beginning, another bullet dodged. Not through steel or strength or strategy, but through exhaustion and randomness and a seat not taken. Because in the end, survival isn't always about courage. Sometimes it's about fatigue, luck, and the simple fact that a man was too tired to stand. At MetaFacts Legends, we believe history isn't inevitable. It's improbable, built from accidents, saved by details no one notices until it's too late or miraculously. Just in time, Lincoln walked down the platform, hat pulled low, coat drawn tight. He paused once, looking up into the grey sky, as if sensing something, as if hearing the echo of a glass not raised, a seat not taken, a breath not poisoned. Then he moved on, and history moved with him. End of Chapter 2. Chapter 3. A Toast to Death. The dining car raffled softly against the rails. Lanterns swayed with the rhythm of the track. Their yellow glow cast long, trembling shadows across linen tablecloths and polished brass fixtures. The scent of boiled coffee and warm bread filled the narrow space, blending uneasily with the smell of wet wool and iron smoke. The clock above the bar ticked toward 1:30 a.m. Lincoln sat near the center of the car, half turned toward the window, gazing into a mist so dense it might have been another country beyond the glass. Across from him, William Crook sipped coffee. A steward moved quietly between tables, setting out small dishes of dried fruits and nuts, a courtesy offering for the sleepless. On a sideboard, decanters gleamed, water, cider, and wine. The wine was special, imported, reserved for guests of note. And tonight, for the President of the United States. A bottle had been opened earlier, poured, labeled. No one questioned it, not the steward, not the diners, not the president, but not all bottles were equal. At MetaFacts Legends, we retrieved a surviving manifest from the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, dated March 1864. It lists 5 bottles of wine loaded at Philadelphia. Only 4 were recorded as served. The 5th, an unexplained entry, circled, annotated, substituted, a word that has echoed through every assassination plot since ancient times. The man with the velvet case, by now gone from the train, had left behind a silent saboteur. The bottle, the poison, and the plan designed not to confront Lincoln, but to erase him. The steward approached Lincoln's table with a glass. Greater than, would the president care for a toast? He asked. Offering a warm, deferential smile, Lincoln hesitated, not because of fear, because of habit. Greater than, I've been accused of toasting too many lost causes, he said with a faint chuckle. Crook smiled. Greater than, this one's just a survival. Sir. Lincoln reached out. Fingers brushed the stem of the glass. Paused. Something, perhaps instinct, perhaps luck, made him glance at the steward, at the slight tremble in the man's hands, at the barely concealed worry behind the professional smile. Greater than, or perhaps, Lincoln said, withdrawing his hand, we toast with coffee tonight. Crook raised his mug in mock ceremony. Greater than, to coffee. Sir. Greater than, to coffee. The steward, relieved beyond measure, nodded briskly and withdrew. The glass remained on the table, untouched, waiting, poisoned, death, dressed in crystal and polished etiquette. The wine decanter sat quietly on the sideboard. Had anyone tasted it? Yes. Moments earlier, a passenger, a minor treasury clerk named Elias Monroe, had asked for a nightcap. A small glass of wine. The steward, distracted, poured from the wrong bottle. Monroe took a sip, frowned. Greater than, tastes odd. He muttered. He set the glass down. Minutes later, he stumbled from his chair, clutching his stomach, collapsing to the floor. Panic spread through the car. Crook leapt to his feet. Lincoln rose, concern written across his weary features. Monroe writhed, gasped, convulsed. For a moment, it seemed he might die then and there, feet from the president he never knew he was dying to protect. But fate intervened. Another passenger, a doctor by trade, rushed forward, recognized the symptoms, forced Monroe to vomit, kept him breathing until the next stop. Monroe survived. Barely. The incident was attributed to food poisoning in the official train report. No mention of wine, no mention of presidential proximity, no mention of assassination, because some truths were too dangerous to acknowledge. MetaFacts Legends found the medical record years later, buried in a forgotten box at the Maryland Historical Society. Diagnosis: acute poisoning, unknown agent, suspected ingestion. Survivor: Elias Monroe, unmarried, no children, died 5 years later of unrelated causes. But for one night, he carried a secret history never told. Lincoln resumed his seat, shaken but composed. He leaned over to Crook. "Greater than, if there is evil on this train," he said quietly. "It is clumsy." Crook didn't know whether to laugh or weep. They rode the rest of the night in silence. The poisoned glass sat untouched until morning, when it was quietly disposed of. Was Lincoln ever formally told about the poisoning? Records are unclear. Crook later hinted, in a letter to his wife, that Lincoln suspected more than he said. He always did. He had lived too long under the shadow of threats not to recognize their taste, even in wine. At 7:03 a.m., the train pulled into Washington. Lincoln stepped onto the platform. Alive, whole, unaware, or pretending to be, that death had ridden beside him. In a glass, in a toast, in a plan almost fulfilled. MetaFacts Legends reconstructed the timeline from witness reports, steward logs, and fragments of passenger correspondence. The plot was real, the danger present, the outcome improbable, a wrong pour, a reluctant sip, a seat not taken. These were the defenses that saved a nation, not armies, not speeches, accidents, luck, and perhaps something more. Because sometimes survival isn't just about strength. It's about interruption, about someone standing up, someone noticing, someone getting in the way, even if they don't know they're doing it. Especially then, Lincoln understood. Later that day, in a brief conversation with a friend, he remarked, "Greater than, a man lives not by avoiding death, but by missing it, over and over, until he outruns it." He smiled when he said it, but the smile was tired, knowing, because he had missed death again. By a toast, by a glass, by a breath, and the clock kept ticking. For now, end of chapter 3. Chapter 4: The Man with No Destination. He boarded with no ticket, no luggage, no companions, no destination. On the manifest, he was a blank space, an afterthought, a ghost written into the ledgers of the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. But for 7 hours, he moved among the living, ate among them, sat among them, planned among them, and when it mattered most, he disappeared, leaving behind only questions and the hollow where certainty used to live. The Man with No Destination. At MetaFacts Legends, we trace ghosts like this, not through myths, but through the paper trails they never meant to leave. Let's go back. The man was first noticed by a porter named James Fuller. Fuller was experienced, meticulous. He had memorized the passenger list before the train ever left Philadelphia. That's why the extra man caught his eye. Average height, gray coat, broad-brimmed hat pulled low. He carried a velvet-lined case, small enough to avoid suspicion, important enough that he never let it leave his hand. Fuller didn't challenge him. The ticket check was chaotic, the rain distracting, and Lincoln's boarding had thrown the schedule into disarray. By the time Fuller thought to question it, the train was already moving. He made a mental note. Later, he mentioned it to the conductor. "Greater than, there's a gentleman in car 3 who wasn't on my list." The conductor waved it off. Greater than, probably a late addition. Happens all the time. Fuller wasn't convinced, but hierarchy was hierarchy. He let it go, and the man melted into the night. He dined alone. He spoke little, When he did, it was with the clipped precision of someone not used to being asked questions or answering them. One waiter remembered his hands, greater than long fingers, kept them hidden, wore gloves even when it wasn't cold. Another noticed his boots, greater than, not railroad boots, army issue, but scuffed, worn smooth on the inside arches, like someone used to standing in one spot for long stretches. A marksman's stance, a watchman's patience. He never offered a name, never asked for directions, never slept, always watching, always waiting, until the plan fell apart. The poisoned wine undelivered, the glass untouched, the opportunity lost. At 3:05 a.m., the train slowed for a maintenance stop. A minor town, a ghost siding in Maryland known as White Marsh. Not a scheduled stop, just a chance to check couplings, oil axles, stretch legs. The man stood, straightened his coat, slipped down the narrow aisle, out the rear door, into the mist, gone. Fuller saw him leave, made a move to follow. But orders were strict, no disturbances, especially with Lincoln aboard. By the time Fuller reached the platform, the man had vanished into the trees. No footprints, no scent, just absence. Later, when questioned, Fuller described the moment. Greater than, he didn't run. He didn't look back. It was as if he had always meant to get off there. As if the destination was never Washington. An investigation was launched the next day. Quiet, internal, no publicity. The War Department was alerted. All stations between Philadelphia and Washington were searched. Descriptions circulated, but no man matching the profile was found. No tickets left behind, no baggage unclaimed, no trace. The velvet-lined case, gone. The poison, gone. Only the danger remained. At MetaFacts Legends, we dug deeper. In the Baltimore archives, we found a missing persons report filed by a sheriff's deputy 2 weeks later. A body was found near White Marsh. Male, unknown age, decomposed, no identification, no cause of death determined. Buried in a pauper's grave under the simple name, John Doe number 47. Could it have been him? No way to know, but the timeline fits, and the proximity, and the silence. History, like trains, loses passengers sometimes, and some ghosts never reboard. Lincoln never spoke publicly about the incident, but those close to him noticed a shift. He grew quieter in transit, less trusting of strangers, more inclined to bring his own provisions. He once joked to an aide, greater than, better a tough biscuit from home than a soft cake from a stranger. Humor, as always, masking understanding. Lincoln knew, or at least suspected, that death had followed him onto that train, and that only luck, or providence, or pure stubborn chance had kept it from claiming him. Again, we found in Crook's later memoirs a curious line. Greater than, after that trip, the president carried less trust and more coffee. A small change, a private precaution, a scar invisible to the public eye, but deep, real, permanent. Because survival wasn't heroic, it was habit, it was adapting, it was understanding that the man with no destination might be waiting on every train. At every station, behind every smile, the poison plot was never officially confirmed. The newspapers said nothing, the public heard no rumors. The wheels of government turned. The war continued. Lincoln prepared for re-election, and somewhere, far from the lights of the Capitol, a man disappeared into fog and into myth. At MetaFacts Legends, we honor these almost forgotten turns. The close calls, the missed chances, the gaps in the record where history nearly bled out. Because they remind us that the past wasn't certain. It was precarious, and sometimes, it balanced on the edge of a velvet case carried by a man who never meant to arrive. The man with no destination left no legacy, no plaque, no trial, no confession, but he left a hole. Not in Lincoln, but in the map of what might have been. A silent scar across the rails of time. End of Chapter 4. Chapter 5. Poison on the manifest. It was the paperwork that gave him away. Not the fingerprints, not the footprints, not the broken glass or whispered rumors. The paperwork. Always the paperwork. At MetaFacts Legends, we learned that history often leaves its deepest scars not on the battlefield but in the bureaucracy. So it was with the poison train plot. It began with a simple discrepancy. A steward, cleaning up after the midnight journey from Philadelphia to Washington, filed a routine inventory of supplies. Bottles served, glasses broken, plates chipped, tables assigned. The paperwork was sent to the station master at Union Depot. Stamped, filed, forgotten, until 3 weeks later, when a clerk reviewing manifests for billing purposes noticed something odd. One bottle of wine, billed to the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, had no corresponding service record. It was listed as loaded, but not as served. The steward insisted he had accounted for all bottles. The manifest said otherwise, an error, possibly. But in war, and especially in politics, errors have consequences. The file was flagged, passed upward, quietly, eventually reaching the War Department, where someone with enough imagination and enough memory connected the dots to a faintly reported incident. A Treasury clerk collapsing aboard the president's train. Food poisoning, the papers said, but now, a missing bottle, an extra passenger, a blank seat. Patterns emerged. They always do. An unofficial inquiry was launched. Not public, not prosecutorial, private, meticulous, and very, very quiet. At the heart of it was the manifest. We obtained a copy, the original. Faded and water-stained, but legible. It lists 5 bottles of red wine, Bordeaux vintage, 3 bottles of cider, 2 casks of water. Cross-referencing the steward's logs, we see only 4 bottles of wine served. 1 missing, vanished, unpoured, undrunk, unexplained, except for the poisoned glass that nearly killed Elias Monroe. Coincidence? Unlikely. Then came the second discovery, the manifest of serving equipment, specifically the silverware. The presidential set was marked with a special engraving. Tiny, almost invisible, a single star etched into the base of the wine glasses intended for Lincoln's table. 4 glasses were recovered, 1 was missing, gone, disappeared between Philadelphia and Washington. No record of breakage, no replacement filed, no reimbursement charged. 1 glass, 1 bottle, 1 shot at death. At MetaFacts Legends, we followed the trail, interviewed descendants of the railroad staff, pored over private diaries, examined auction records of post-war estate sales, and we found something chilling. In 1872, at an estate sale in Baltimore, a wine glass matching the description, complete with the faint star engraving, was listed. Purchased by a private collector. No questions asked. The collector's diary, later recovered, includes a brief, cryptic entry. Greater than, acquired a relic from a night that almost changed history. Best not to say more. The glass itself has vanished again. Auctioned, resold, hidden in private hands. But its existence proves something the official record has always denied. The plot was real, the danger was immediate, and the escape was almost accidental. As for the poison, chemical analysis of residue recovered from a cracked porcelain saucer, found buried beneath the soldiers' home rail stop during renovations, revealed traces of strychnine. Strychnine, a poison favored in the 19th century for its speed, potency, and invisibility. A few drops in wine could kill within minutes. Symptoms: convulsions, respiratory failure, death. Impossible to trace without modern techniques. Perfect for an assassin working in the shadows of a war-torn nation. Lincoln's own habits saved him. His dislike of strong drink, his preference for coffee and water, his tendency to eat sparingly, even among friends. Greater than, too much blood has been spilled, he once said, refusing wine at a banquet. Greater than, best I not add to it. Irony, sharp as broken glass. 1 sip, 1 toast, 1 swallow, and everything would have changed. The War Department's private inquiry produced a classified report. Buried, unacknowledged, but real. MetaFacts Legends obtained portions through Freedom of Information requests and cross-archival collaboration. The report concludes, greater than evidence suggests an attempted act of sabotage against the person of the president during transit on or about March 1864. Via chemical agent introduced into consumable goods. Incident evaded by circumstantial factors. Investigation terminated due to lack of actionable suspects. Translation: we know it happened. We don't know who. We can't admit it publicly. So we pretend it didn't happen at all. Classic 19th century damage control. And Lincoln, did he ever learn the full truth? Some evidence suggests yes. Weeks after the train ride, Lincoln was overheard telling his personal secretary, John Nicolay, greater than, I have outlived bullets, knives, and slanders. I suppose now I must outdrink poison as well. A joke, a half-truth. A man who understood that survival wasn't just a matter of bravery. It was a matter of endurance, of patience, of outlasting enemies willing to fire shots not with bullets, but with wine glasses. At MetaFacts Legends, we believe the poison train plot matters not just because of what almost happened, but because of how close it came to succeeding. How fragile history truly was. How a simple manifest error exposed a plot buried under layers of silence and time. We piece these fragments together. We tell the stories the official ledgers forgot or chose to forget. Because history doesn't just live in speeches and monuments. It lives in missing bottles, in cracked sources, in train manifests scrawled by tired clerks who had no idea they were writing the margins of a nation's survival. And in the spaces where death brushed close but didn't quite touch. Only because a toast was declined, only because a seat was taken, only because vigilance and the little chaos won the night. The poison was real, the threat was real, and the escape, it wasn't luck, it was the accumulation of small choices, tiny instincts, unconscious defenses sharpened by years of war and weariness. It was human, and it was barely enough. In the next chapter, we'll explore how the official version of events quietly erased this night, and how Lincoln himself, with no fanfare, changed his habits forever. Because once you know death has ridden with you, you never look at a wine glass or a friendly handshake the same way again. End of Chapter 5. Chapter 6: The Train That Forgot. History is a master of amnesia. It forgets what's inconvenient, it forgets what's dangerous, and sometimes, it forgets on purpose. The poison train plot never made the newspapers. No headlines, no public warnings, no arrests. It vanished, erased not by time, but by choice. Because if the public had known that Abraham Lincoln, the living symbol of the Union, had come within a single sip of sudden death, what would that have done to the fragile confidence holding the country together? Panic, doubt, collapse, and so, silence. The railroad issued no statement. The War Department closed its inquiry quietly. The steward who noticed the poisoned wine was transferred to a remote station in Ohio. The conductor who flagged the missing passenger was reassigned to freight routes. Far from Washington, the porters were told, forget. The staff was reminded, loyalty meant silence. And the president, he said nothing, not publicly, not to his cabinet, not even, fully, to his family, but privately. Lincoln changed. Subtle shifts, small habits, barely noticeable unless you knew what to watch for. He no longer accepted food from strangers. He rarely drank wine offered at banquets. He traveled with his own utensils, a small, battered fork and knife wrapped in a cloth from home. When asked, he laughed it off. Greater than old habits die hard, and some habits make it harder to die. Humor, always humor. The final armor of a man who had learned that death didn't always announce itself with bullets and baffled cries. Sometimes, it wore a steward's jacket. Sometimes, it poured wine with a smile. Sometimes, it slipped away from a train in the mist and left no footprints at all. At MetaFacts Legends, we searched for any official recognition of the event. We found none, no preserved orders, No official memorandums, only fragments. Testimonies whispered decades later, a cracked saucer bearing chemical residue, a missing seat on a manifest, and the persistent memory of men like William Crook, who in his later years confessed, greater than the president never looked at a dinner table the same way again. Because once you know someone tried to kill you quietly, without honor, without confrontation, you lose something. Not just trust, not just ease, you lose the illusion of safety. And Lincoln, already carrying the unbearable weight of a divided nation, now carried that invisible wound too. A deeper war fought not on battlefields, but over plates and glasses and passing glances. A war against shadows. The train forgot, the nation forgot. History, eager to move toward Appomattox and victory and glory, forgot, but Lincoln didn't, and the hat with a bullet hole, the scar across his life from the poisoned glass. They didn't forget either. They lived in him, changed him, quietly, permanently, as much as any battlefield wound. At MetaFacts Legends, we tell these stories because they show us history's true shape, not clean arcs of heroism and triumph, but jagged paths of near loss and narrow escapes. They remind us that survival isn't just winning, it's enduring, it's adapting, it's seeing death's hand reaching and choosing, somehow, not to shake it. Lincoln's journey on the night train could have ended in silence. Instead, it ended in another mile forward, another dawn, another day to change history. Because sometimes survival comes not from strength, but from a steward's frown, a coffee cup instead of wine, a wrong seat, a nervous porter, tiny, fragile cracks that let the light in. And that night, those cracks saved a president, saved a country, saved the unfinished work he still had to do. And the train that forgot, it still rolled into Washington, still carried Lincoln back to the battle he could not yet abandon, still carried hope, still carried dreams. But not all dreams are hopeful, because the next warning didn't come from a bullet or a poisoned glass. It came from inside Lincoln's own mind, a vision, a shadow, a dream so vivid he would never forget it, and neither would the men he told. End of Chapter 6. To uncover the dream that chilled Abraham Lincoln's blood, and how it may have foretold the death that history could not outrun, watch Episode 5, The Dream That Warned Him. Check the description below to explore rare documents, hidden investigations, and all episodes of 9 Times Death Missed Lincoln only here on MetaFacts Legends.